By the time it finds you, you'll have already made up your mind to stop trying. That's the part nobody warns you about. You picture giving up as a decision you'll make on a bad day, in a weak moment, something you could talk yourself out of. But it doesn't work like that. When it comes, it doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like clarity. It feels like you've finally seen the truth that everyone else was too naive to admit. The truth that it was never going to happen for you. That you've been wasting your time. That the door you've been knocking on was always a wall. And here's the thing that should chill you and comfort you at the same time. That feeling has almost perfect timing. It tends to arrive not when things are at their worst, but when they're closest to turning. It shows up at the exact moment before the breakthrough, wearing the mask of final proof that no breakthrough is coming. Carl Jung saw this pattern so many times in the people who came to him that he stopped treating it as random. He noticed that his patients would do the deepest, hardest work of their lives, and then, right at the edge of something genuinely new, they would collapse into a despair so total and so convincing that they wanted to abandon everything. Not because they were failing, because something inside them was fighting the change with everything it had. And it always fought hardest right before it lost. Think about a long swim toward a shoreline. For the first stretch, you can see yourself making progress. The shore grows, the houses on the beach get bigger. And then there's a phase, the worst phase, where the shore seems to stop getting closer. You're swimming as hard as you ever have, your arms are burning, and the land just hangs there at the same distance, like the whole ocean has decided to keep you. That's the moment swimmers drown, not from lack of strength, from the certainty that they aren't moving, when in truth they're closer than they've ever been. Jung understood that the psyche has its own version of that dead stretch, and he spent years trying to teach people to recognize it, because the people who recognized it survived it, and the people who didn't turned back one stroke from the sand. Today I want to walk you through exactly what this thing is that finds people right before their lives turn, where it comes from, why its timing is so cruel and so precise, the specific signs that tell you you're inside it rather than actually finished, and what Jung believed you have to do in that moment, when every signal in your body is screaming at you to quit, to make it to the shore that's much closer than it looks. Let's start with where this comes from, because once you understand the mechanism, the despair loses some of its power over you. It stops being the voice of God and starts being something you can name. Jung's whole understanding of the mind rested on an idea that sounds simple, but changes everything once you take it seriously. He believed the psyche is not a passive thing that random events happen to. He believed it has direction. It's going somewhere. There's a pull inside every person toward becoming more whole, more themselves, more complete. And that pull operates whether you cooperate with it or not. He called the overall process individuation, and the key thing to understand is that it has a goal. The psyche is reaching for something. Now, if part of you is reaching toward a new way of being, there's also a part of you that's heavily invested in the old way. The old way is familiar. It's survivable. You've built your whole identity, your relationships, your daily routines, your sense of what's possible, around the person you've already been. And that older structure does not want to die quietly. It will resist. And the closer you get to actually changing, the harder it resists. Because the threat is no longer hypothetical. It's real. It's right there. This is the piece almost everyone misses. People assume resistance is strongest at the beginning, when the change feels impossible and far away. The opposite is true. Resistance is weakest when the change is just an idea you're toying with, because the old self isn't threatened by ideas, it's threatened by imminent reality. So as you actually move toward the breakthrough, as it stops being a fantasy and starts becoming inevitable, the resistance doesn't fade, it spikes. It throws everything it has at you in one last desperate effort to keep you where you were. And what it throws at you, more often than anything else, is despair. A flat, gray, bottomless conviction that none of it matters and none of it will work, and you should stop now to spare yourself further humiliation. That despair is not information about your future. It's the sound of an old structure fighting for its life. But it doesn't announce itself that way. It comes dressed as wisdom. It comes dressed as the mature, realistic acceptance of defeat. Jung observed something else that's worth sitting with. He noticed that the psyche has a self-regulating quality, a way of compensating, of swinging hard in one direction to balance a movement in another. When a person has been pushing forward for a long time, holding hope, holding effort, holding the line against discouragement, the unconscious will sometimes flood them with the exact opposite, a sudden, overwhelming wave of hopelessness. He understood this not as the truth finally breaking through, but as the counterweight, the swing of the pendulum, the psyche's attempt to pull the whole system back toward an old equilibrium, right when that equilibrium is about to be lost forever. So you have two forces converging at the worst possible moment. The old self resisting hardest because the change is closest, and the psyche compensating, swinging toward despair, precisely because you've been holding hope for so long. Both of them peak at the same time, and that convergence is what finds you right before everything works out. Let me describe what this actually feels like from the inside, because the abstract explanation only goes so far, and what matters is that you can recognize it when it's happening to you. It usually doesn't feel dramatic, that's the first surprise. People expect their dark night to feel cinematic, full of weeping and breakdown. But this particular despair is quieter and more dangerous than that. It feels like a switch flipping to off. The thing you cared about so much, the goal, the relationship, the project, the recovery, the dream, suddenly feels distant and slightly absurd, like a coat you can't believe you ever wore. You don't rage against it, you just stop wanting it. The desire goes cold in your hands, and riding underneath that coldness is a feeling of certainty. This is the most deceptive part. You feel like you finally stopped lying to yourself. You feel like the optimism was the delusion, and this gray flatness is reality finally arriving. There's almost a grim relief in it, the relief of giving up. The exhaustion of hope is heavy, and laying it down feels like rest. That's why people surrender at this stage. It feels like wisdom, and it feels like peace, and both of those feelings are lies the old self tells to get you to turn around. Jung was unusually honest about how convincing this state is. He didn't pretend you could just think your way out of it with positive affirmations. He knew that when the unconscious floods you, your conscious reasoning gets recruited into the flood. Your mind doesn't fight the despair. It starts building arguments for it. It assembles evidence. It reviews every past failure and presents them to you as a case file proving you should quit. The intelligence you'd normally use to find a way through gets turned against you, and it builds the most persuasive argument for surrender you've ever heard, because it's coming from inside. This is why willpower alone often isn't enough here. You can't out-argue a part of your mind that has access to all your fears and is using them strategically. What you can do is something different. You can recognize the pattern. You can learn to notice the timing, because the timing is the tell. The timing is the one thing the despair can't disguise. Ask yourself, when this flatness arrives, whether anything has actually changed in your circumstances, or whether you've simply been at it long enough and gotten close enough for the resistance to wake up. Most of the time, nothing real has shifted. No new evidence arrived. You didn't get a letter saying it's over. You just hit the dead stretch, the place where the shore stops getting closer, and your mind interpreted that plateau as the end of the road when it was actually the last 100 meters. Here is the cruelest and most important truth Jung kept circling back to. The intensity of the resistance is often proportional to the significance of what's trying to emerge. The small changes don't generate this kind of darkness. Nobody falls into a bottomless despair over a minor adjustment. The breakthrough that brings on the worst night is usually the one that matters most. The resistance is loud because the prize is large. So, the very depth of your discouragement, the thing you're reading as proof that it's hopeless, is often a measure of how much is at stake. The unconscious doesn't waste this much firepower defending a structure that wasn't important. I want you to really hold that because it inverts everything. The despair you feel right before the breakthrough isn't evidence that there's nothing there. It's evidence that there's something there big enough to fight for. The wall in front of you is tall because what's behind it is worth guarding. And the part of you guarding it isn't the future. It's the past, making its final stand. Jung understood the psyche as something that moves toward its own healing, even when the person experiencing it has no idea that's what's happening. He saw the symptom itself as containing the seed of the cure, the breakdown carrying the blueprint of the breakthrough, which means the despair isn't separate from the transformation. It's part of it. It's the friction of the old shape being broken so a new one can form. You can't have the new life without the dismantling of the old, and the dismantling, while you're inside it, feels exactly like ruin. Let me give this some texture with the kind of moment Jung saw constantly. Picture someone who has spent 2 years rebuilding their life after it fell apart. They've done everything right, done the inner work, made the changes, held the discipline, kept showing up when nothing was visibly improving. And then one ordinary Tuesday, with no warning and no new bad news, they wake up and feel that the whole effort was pointless. They feel like a fool. They look at the new life they've been building, and it seems like a sandcastle, fragile and stupid, and they feel an overwhelming urge to walk away from all of it, to stop pretending, to accept that people don't really change and they were a fool to think they could. What that person can't see on that Tuesday is that they are standing closer to the turn than they have ever been. The despair didn't arrive because they failed. It arrived because they were about to succeed, and the part of them that's terrified of succeeding pulled the emergency brake. If they quit that Tuesday, they'll spend years believing they tried and it didn't work, when the truth is they turned back one stroke from the sand. There's a particular grief in watching someone do that, and Jung carried that grief. He watched people reach the edge of their own becoming and flinch. He watched them choose the familiar misery over the unfamiliar freedom, because the familiar misery at least had a shape they knew. And he came to believe that the single most valuable thing he could give a person wasn't insight or interpretation. It was the ability to recognize this specific moment for what it was, so they wouldn't mistake the last test for the final verdict. If something in this is landing close to home, if you're recognizing a version of this gray certainty in your own life right now, our guide, True Self-Discovery, was built for exactly this kind of stretch. It's 24 reflection exercises grounded in Jung's understanding of the psyche, made to help you tell the difference between the voice of your old self protecting its territory and the voice of something real trying to emerge. Not to rush you past the dark stretch, but to give you something to hold while you're in it. You'll find it linked right below. Now let me show you how to read the signs that you're inside this moment, rather than actually at the end of the road. Because there are signs. The despair isn't featureless. It has fingerprints, and once you learn them, you can catch yourself before you make a decision you'll spend years regretting. The first sign is that the discouragement is global rather than specific. When something real has gone wrong, your distress tends to be focused. You're upset about a particular thing, and you can name it, and there's a logic to it. The resistance despair is different. It's everywhere at once. It doesn't just tell you this one thing won't work. It tells you nothing will work, that you're fundamentally incapable, that your whole life is a string of failures, that even the things that went well were flukes. When the bad feeling spreads out to cover everything indiscriminately, that's a tell. Real problems are local. This kind of despair is a weather system, and weather systems aren't about you specifically. They just move through. The second sign is the absence of a triggering event. Pay attention to whether this gray conviction arrived in response to something, or whether it just descended. Genuine setbacks have causes. You can trace them. But this often comes out of nowhere, on a day when nothing happened, which is precisely why people find it so frightening and so persuasive. They think, if I feel this bad and nothing even went wrong, then the badness must be the truth underneath everything. The opposite reading is closer to reality. The fact that nothing triggered it suggests it's not a response to your circumstances at all. It's a movement of the psyche, the swing of the pendulum, the resistance waking up because you've gotten close. The third sign is the seductive pull toward a clean ending. Notice if part of you is being drawn to the idea of just stopping, and notice how good that idea feels. The resistance doesn't only generate pain, it generates the fantasy of relief. It dangles the rest you'd get if you quit, the weight you'd put down, the permission to stop trying, and it makes surrender look like maturity. This is one of its most reliable moves. If you find yourself romanticizing giving up, Picturing the peace of finally letting go of the thing you've worked for, treat that as a flashing light. The old self knows you won't quit out of pain alone, so it offers you peace as the bribe. The fourth sign is a strange acceleration in your outer life, right before or during the despair. This one surprised even Jung. He noticed that as people approached a genuine inner turning point, the world around them seemed to respond. Coincidences clustered, meaningful encounters happened, the right book, the right conversation, the right stranger appeared at oddly perfect moments. He called this phenomenon synchronicity, this sense of inner and outer reality lining up in ways that ordinary cause and effect couldn't explain. And he observed that these meaningful coincidences often intensified precisely when a person was on the edge of transformation, as though the whole field of their life was reorganizing itself around the change that was coming. So if you notice that, despite your despair, things keep almost falling into place, that opportunities keep brushing past you, that the universe seems to be nudging at the very moment you've decided it's all pointless, pay attention. That dissonance, the gap between the hopelessness you feel and the strange momentum building around you, is one of the clearest signs that you're not at the end, you're at the hinge. The fifth sign is that the despair attacks the specific thing you're closest to achieving. Watch where the discouragement aims. It's rarely random. It tends to go straight for the area of your life where you've made the most progress, where the breakthrough is nearest. The recovering addict feels most like using right before real freedom. The writer feels most like burning the manuscript right before it's finished. The person rebuilding after heartbreak feels most certain they'll be alone forever right before the door opens. The resistance is strategic. It targets the most important front because that's where the most is at stake. If the despair is hitting hardest exactly where you've come furthest, that's not a coincidence. That's the map. Now, recognizing the signs is one thing. Surviving the moment is another. Because even when you understand intellectually what's happening, the feeling is still there, still heavy, still convincing. So what did Jung actually believe you should do when this finds you? The first thing is something that sounds almost too simple, but it's the whole game. You don't have to win the argument. You just have to not make any permanent decisions while you're in the storm. The despair wants a verdict. It wants you to declare the whole thing over, to quit, to walk away, to make some irreversible move that can't be undone once the weather passes. And the single most important discipline is to refuse to give it that. You can feel completely hopeless and still decline to act on the hopelessness. You can let the wave move through you without letting it move your hands. Jung knew you couldn't always control the feeling, but you can almost always control whether you sign the divorce papers of your own dream while you're drowning. This is the difference between experiencing despair and obeying it. Most people don't realize there's a gap between the two. They assume that if they feel it's over, they have to act like it's over. But the feeling and the action are separable, and learning to separate them is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. Feel the flatness, feel the certainty of failure, and then do absolutely nothing irreversible until it lifts. Because it will lift. These states have a half-life. They burn out. The version of you that exists on the other side of the storm will have a completely different read on everything, and that's the version that should be allowed to make the big calls. The second thing Jung pointed toward is the difference between surrender and quitting, because they look identical from the outside, and they are opposites underneath. Quitting is when you turn around and swim back toward where you came from. Surrender is when you stop fighting the water but keep facing the shore. Quitting is a decision against the goal. Surrender is letting go of your grip on how and when, while staying pointed at where you're going. The swimmer who drowns is usually the one who panics and thrashes. The one who survives sometimes stops swimming hard, floats, conserves, lets the current do what their exhausted arms can't, and trusts that they're closer than they feel. Jung understood that there's a moment in transformation where pure effort stops working, where pushing harder just exhausts you, and what's required instead is a kind of active waiting. You stop trying to force the breakthrough on your timeline, and you start trusting the process that's been carrying you the whole time. That's not the same as giving up. It's the deepest form of staying in. It's saying, I will not abandon this, but I will stop strangling it, and I will let it arrive in its own way and its own hour. The third thing is to deliberately not trust your interpretation of events during this period. When you're in the resistance despair, your mind becomes an unreliable narrator. It reads every neutral event as confirmation that you're doomed. A delayed reply means rejection. A small setback means total collapse. An ordinary bad day means your whole life is a failure. Jung would tell you that during these stretches, your interpreting function is compromised, and you should treat its conclusions the way you treat the conclusions of a friend who is in the middle of a panic attack, with compassion, but not with belief. You don't have to argue with the story. You just have to remember that you're not in a position to trust the storyteller right now, and that the meaning you're assigning to everything is being assigned by a frightened part of you that's trying to talk you off the path. There's a phrase worth carrying through these moments. Wait for the weather to clear before you read the sky. Don't make sense of your life from inside the storm. The clearest seeming insights that arrive during deep despair, the ones that feel like hard-won truth, like you've finally seen reality, are very often just the storm wearing the costume of wisdom. Real clarity has a different texture. It doesn't come crashing in on a wave of hopelessness. It tends to arrive quietly, on the other side, when the water has gone still. The fourth thing, and this is the one people resist most, is that you may have to stay in the not knowing longer than feels survivable. The breakthrough rarely arrives the instant you decide to hold on. There's usually a gap, a stretch where you've refused to quit but nothing has visibly changed yet, where you're just hanging on in the gray with no proof that hanging on is doing anything. That stretch is the real test. Anyone can hold on when they can see the shore. The question is whether you can hold on through the part where you can't. Jung believed that the people who came through were the ones who could tolerate that interval, who could keep going without the reassurance of visible progress, who could trust the direction even when they'd lost sight of the destination. And that interval is exactly where the temptation is strongest, because the relief of quitting is right there, and the cost of holding on is this ongoing, unglamorous, witnessless effort that nobody is applauding. That's why so many people turn back here. Not in a moment of high drama, but in a quiet moment of exhaustion, when holding on simply felt like too much for one more day. The tragedy of it is that the breakthrough is often just past the edge of how long you thought you could last. It tends to arrive at the point where you had decided you couldn't go any further, and then went a little further anyway. If you're somewhere in that interval right now, holding on with nothing to show for it, unsure whether you're being brave or just stubborn, the reflection work in true self-discovery is meant to walk beside you through exactly this part. 24 exercises drawn from Jung's approach to the psyche, built to help you stay oriented when you can't see the shore, to help you separate the voice that's guarding your past from the one that's calling you forward. It's linked below this video for whenever you need it. Let me show you now what tends to happen when a person makes it through this stretch instead of turning back, because something does happen, and it's almost never what the person expected. The first thing Jung noticed is that the breakthrough, when it comes, rarely looks like the thing you were straining toward. You spend the whole journey picturing a specific outcome, a particular shape the success will take, and then what actually arrives is different, often better, but in a way you couldn't have designed because it required a version of you that didn't exist yet. The struggle wasn't just about reaching the goal. It was about becoming the kind of person who could hold what was on the other side. And that becoming is invisible to you while it's happening. You think you're just suffering. You don't realize you're being made into someone capable of receiving the very thing you've been asking for. This is part of why the timing is so cruel. The breakthrough often can't come until the old self is genuinely willing to die. And the old self isn't genuinely willing to die until it's exhausted every other option, including the option of despair. The darkness right before the dawn isn't decoration. It's functional. It's the final exhaustion of the resistance. The old structure throws its last and biggest wave, and when that wave passes and you're still there, still pointed at the shore, the resistance has nothing left. It's spent. And in that spentness, the new thing finally has room to come through. People who pass through this describe the turn in remarkably similar ways. They say it was sudden and gradual at once. Sudden in that one day the weather simply broke, and they could feel the shift in their body, a lightness, a loosening, the gray lifting. Gradual in that, looking back, they could see it had been building the whole time, underneath the despair, in the part of the field they couldn't perceive. The shore had been getting closer the entire time they were convinced it wasn't. They just couldn't measure their own progress from inside the swim. Jung also observed that the people who came through this kind of passage carried something afterward that they hadn't had before, a certain steadiness, a reduced fear of the dark stretches, because they'd been through one and learned that it lifts. They stopped treating despair as the final word, because they'd had the experience of feeling it's over and then watching it turn out not to be. That experience is almost impossible to give someone secondhand. You have to live through one full cycle of total hopelessness, followed by genuine breakthrough before you really believe in your bones that the hopelessness lies. And once you believe it, the next dark stretch can't take you the same way. You've seen behind the curtain. There's a kind of trust that gets built only this way. Not the cheap optimism that's never been tested, but a worn, earned confidence that comes from having gone all the way down and all the way back up. Jung thought this was one of the most valuable things a person could possess, and he didn't think there was any shortcut to it. You couldn't read your way to it or affirm your way to it. You had to survive the passage. The despair wasn't an obstacle to that kind of trust. It was the raw material of it. The strength came from the very place that felt like weakness. And here's something worth saying plainly because it cuts against everything the despair tells you. The fact that you're still here, still reading, still turning this over instead of having already given up completely, is itself a sign. The resistance hasn't won. Some part of you is still pointed at the shore, still refusing the clean ending, still looking for a reason to hold on for one more day. That part of you is not naive. It's the part that knows. It's the deepest intelligence in you, the one reaching toward your own wholeness, and it's still reaching, even now, even in the gray. The despair would have you believe that part is foolish. It isn't. It's the only part of you that can see past the storm. Let me speak to you directly for a moment, whoever you are, wherever you are in this. If everything in your life feels like it's not working right now, if you've done the work and nothing has visibly changed and you're starting to feel the cold certainty that it never will, I need you to consider, seriously, that you might be exactly where Jung watched so many people stand right before their lives turned. Consider that the flatness you feel isn't a verdict but a stage. Consider that the very depth of your discouragement might be measuring the size of what's trying to come through. I'm not asking you to feel hopeful. You probably can't right now, and the demand to feel hopeful when you don't just adds shame to the despair. I'm asking something smaller and more doable. I'm asking you to not turn back yet, to hold the line for one more stretch, to refuse to make any permanent decision about your future while you're inside this weather, to stay pointed at the shore even if you've stopped believing it's there, and to let yourself be carried for a while if your arms are too tired to swim. That's all. That's enough. That's often the whole difference between the people who make it and the people who turn around one stroke from the sand. Jung gave his life to the conviction that the psyche is moving toward wholeness, that there's a deep purpose threading through even the worst stretches of a person's life, that the breakdown so often carries the breakthrough folded up inside it. He wasn't naive about suffering. He sat with people in the deepest darkness imaginable, including his own, and he came out the other side believing that the darkness, while real, was not the destination. It was the passage. And the people who could endure the passage without mistaking it for the end were the ones who found, waiting for them on the other side, the life they'd nearly walked away from. The thing that finds you right before everything works out isn't sent to defeat you. It just feels that way, because it comes wearing the face of defeat. It's the last resistance of a self that's about to be outgrown. It's the pendulum at the far end of its swing, about to come back. It's the shore that stopped getting closer right before the current took you in. And the only thing it actually needs from you, to win, is for you to believe it and quit. The only thing you need, to come through, is to not. So if it's found you, or if it finds you soon, I hope you'll remember this. The despair has impeccable timing, and that timing is not a curse. It's a clue. It tells you you're close. It tells you the thing you're reaching for is real and worth fighting for, because the resistance doesn't spend this kind of force on anything small. Stay in the water. Keep facing the shore. Let the storm exhaust itself against you instead of carrying you back. Something is about to break, and on the far side of that breaking is the version of your life you've been swimming toward this entire time. Closer now than it has ever been, even though, especially though, you cannot yet see the sand. If you haven't yet, take a look at our guide, True Self-Discovery. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's understanding of the psyche, built for exactly this kind of dark stretch, the one that finds you right before the turn. A way to keep your bearings when the shore disappears, and to learn the difference between the voice protecting your past and the one calling you toward what's next. The link is right below this video, waiting for you whenever you're ready to reach for it.